I will speak from a development economics and development policy perspective. There are excellent presentations coming, and we just listened to some, which focus on food security and agriculture. I will take a broader perspective because I believe that unless the political change process and the economic reforms that are in the making are shaped appropriately, food and agriculture policy, more narrowly defined, will not have a chance to make a difference for food security. The outline which I've put up in my only slide of this presentation gives you what I will briefly focus on. The changing world around the Arab world sets very important parameters and conditions for the economic prospects of the region and for the political prospects. The world has become a lot more multipolar. That's an opportunity for partnerships of the region. The world features a lot more information accessibly for all, social networks, and an aspiring middle class that demands change. But as Fauzi already mentioned, the world also features a lot more volatile markets, risks, unpredictabilities that impact on food security. The world has become a lot more competitive, and competitiveness in services and industries determine where foreign direct investment goes. Foreign direct investment has lots of alternatives. The Arab region has lost out in FDI in the last few years, and that's a serious matter. If you look at the political challenges, let me just, of the Arab regions, I cannot give you a run through what you all know are the current big challenges, highly diverse within the region. I just want to highlight that it also depends how people feel about their situation, and not just how the reality of food and nutrition security, health, access to resources, and so on are objectively measured. In that sense, the Arab Revolution is also one of minds and not just one of classes, groups, and economic forces. The political change process, however, may also offer opportunities for development, including revitalizing old ideas such as Arab unity, which have gone out of fashion since Nasser. I will come back to that point again. In terms of economic challenges, I think two are the biggest and most fundamental ones. One relates to employment, and the other one relates to fiscal policy in the region. Potentially, the Arab region has great opportunities to harvest a demographic dividend. Lots of young people, boys and girls, growing into the labor force and potentially facilitating innovation and economic growth. But due to ill-designed education and training systems over the last 2 to 3 decades, the generation which could facilitate and could be the backbone of demographic dividend is ill-prepared. And that needs to be corrected, but cannot be corrected in the short run. Arab governments must match employment, entrepreneurship, and education outcomes with the aspirations of their younger people. The question is how. I think the main focus in that field needs to be on the quality of education, the quality of universities, a dual education system, bringing entrepreneurship together with education. As I said, the second big issue which I see in the field of economic challenges is the lack of fiscal transparency, not just on expenditures, but also on the taxation side. If that's not fixed, economic policy reform will run into constantly into traps of corruption. And as long as fiscal accounts are not consolidated, that is a very serious reform agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, are there lessons for Arab countries from political and economic transformation processes elsewhere in the world? I believe yes. Of course, it's a unique situation in which the Arab world, actually I prefer plural, Arab worlds currently are. But you know the saying, those who it's intelligent to learn from one's own mistakes, but it is wise to learn from others' mistakes. I believe there's a lot of wisdom in the Arab world to learn from others' mistakes and successes. I think the most interesting economic and political transformation processes which are relevant for the Arab world are the Latin American transformations after the end of military dictatorships, Turkey's recent successful development, Indonesia's policy and economic change processes, and to some extent change in Eastern Europe. Let me highlight this one in particular, being from Europe and emphasizing that change is very important for smooth change, effective change, future-oriented change from a European perspective. The disciplining role of the European Union in overcoming dictatorships and the Eastern European countries' inclusion is an interesting case in point. Lessons are that powerful incentives of integration, such as demonstrated for Romania and Bulgaria and the Balkans, and strong disincentives for violation of principles of civil rights and social and economic institutions, I think are worthwhile taking a look at. Let me comment a bit on European-Arab cooperation. The Barcelona process, the European Neighborhood Policy, the Union for the Mediterranean, and what all these programs were called, have failed. They failed in terms of vision and effectiveness. The focus on oil and security was far too limited. The lack of attention to political change, human rights, and participation was short-sighted. The separation of development policy understood as technical assistance and policy development, this separation was artificial and inappropriate and has supported oppressive regimes. Trade agreements lacked ambition. If you look at the EU-Egyptian trade agreements on agriculture, they are as restrictive as 20 years ago, and I think that needs to change. Europe needs to become a lot more open on in trade with the Arab region. But I think that in the future, Europe will be a lot more supportive for political and economic development in the Arab region, also because of security and economic self-interests. What priorities for development? Let me just highlight two for development in the Arab region. There's a lot of discussion coming back on a Marshall Plan. You remember Marshall Plan after Second World War in Europe, a rollout of an investment and incentive plan in Europe, guided by the United States. The acceptance, however, of external monitoring, of domestic monitoring capacity was absolutely essential for the success of the Marshall Plan. So Marshall Plan is not just money, it is an institutional framework without which it doesn't work. That capacity for domestic implementation has yet to be built in most Arab countries. And in view of budget and tax systems should be a matter of priority. Otherwise, the willingness for external Marshall Plan type investment at scale will not be forthcoming. At the same time, short-term policy action is extremely important to avoid systems breakdowns. So you hear me a bit skeptical about Marshall Plan, but the opportunities should be pursued. Actually, short-term funding support, for instance, currently in Tunisia at scale is forthcoming, and that gives you, with European support and international institutions, Bank and others, World Bank and others. So I think Marshall Plan type concepts have a chance. Second big scheme option is regional integration of the Arab world. Not like Europe, but in an Arab way. Is there a chance? The issue is not mainly economies of scale or tapping comparative advantages in the region. The issue is institutional strengthening and getting disciplining Arab-owned institutions in place. Maybe a start can be made with a community on oil and water, as proposed by Prince Hassan bin Talal last year, comparable with the start of the European Union with a community on steel and coal and a common agricultural policy. We have to get started somewhere. Maybe that's an option. Or a common free trade and people's mobility zones. To make that work, however, requires a willingness to transfer powers to a union, and that willingness will be low for some time in the Arab regions due to lack of political trust and maybe too early as too many countries continue to violate many governance and rights principles. But crises and conflicts can facilitate reassessment of options by political leaders and can foster investment and trust, as we have learned painfully after the Second World War between France and Germany. So establishment of a regional organization to support the transition should be considered. Let me conclude first with a brief point on food security. Food security is a global issue. The Wharton Risk Center, business school, respected business school, now ranks food security, food insecurity among the top societal risks in the world in terms of likelihood of occurrence and impact on people. But much of the food and nutrition security problems in the Arab regions are determined outside agriculture, strongly related to people in rural areas, their lack of access to skills, land, water, jobs, and entrepreneurial opportunities. I would like to summarize the domains for public action that will also be fundamental for food and nutrition security, but are of this broader scale, as follows. Number one, build trust between the citizens and the states and among citizens. So it's not just state-citizens, it's citizen-citizen trust, which needs to be built. That requires investment in social cohesion. The social cohesion in many Arab countries is a major deficiency problem, as a recent OECD report has highlighted that came out last month. Trust requires political freedom, participation, women's equal rights, access to information and accountability. Unfortunately, the list is that long, and none of these can be compromised, the least the freedom of speech. Second is develop human capacity, education, universities to foster labor productivity and innovation in the Arab region. Great opportunities, the entrepreneurship in this region. Third, build social security institutions. The access to services as well as the quality of those services are to be improved fast. Otherwise, frustration will turn into further aggression. And basic social protection with the clarification of the roles of the state, of communities, and of the family is necessary. Fourth is open trade and unleashing the power of small businesses. Unleashing the power of small businesses by their improved access to financing and a soft regulatory regime. That is a cornerstone of any economic strategy. And lastly, political and economic change are linked. They cannot be separated. Strategy should not be driven by technocratic efforts to do development in isolation from political change. The basics, security, legal frameworks, and contract enforcement must be assured. In sum, ladies and gentlemen, I am of the opinion that let freedom reign and let things sort themselves out as long as human rights are adhered to. The Arab world will seek and will find its own pathway for change into the future. I can assure you from how I observe what your European neighbors may be willing to contribute as political and economic and security support is on a better track, but it requires a consensus in Europe. Europe is not able to move fast because it's a consensus-seeking community, the European Union. I expect, however, that a much more open trade, labor, and science exchange between the two regions around the Mediterranean are great foundations for a better future. Thank you for your attention.